Welcome back, guys. For part 6, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking a look at creating the blog controller on the server side and then creating a blog index page on the client side that will use some of the controller functions here. And then in future videos, we're going to be taking a look at how to actually edit your blog and using the other functions that we create on the server side today. All right, let's get right into it. Let's go ahead and move over to the interfaces folder on your server side files and create a new interface called blog.ts. Inside of this, you're going to be exporting a default interface iBlog, and you're going to do the same thing that you did for the user, and it's going to be extending the document from Mongoose. Once you've done that, you're going to create a couple keys. You're going to have a title that's going to be of a type string. You're going to have an author that's going to be of type iUser, and you're going to be importing this from the user interfaces file. Next, you're going to have a content, and that is going to be of type string. Then you're going to also add a headline of type string. You're going to have an optional picture that is also of type string. So to quickly explain what each of these is for, the title is going to be the title of your blog post. The author on the client side is either going to be the author object or just the string of their Mongo ID, and that's going to be who posted this blog. The content is going to be what's displayed when you view the actual full blog post. The headline is going to be the little preview that shows up inside of the blog index page. And the optional picture will allow the user to change the banner page, or the banner picture to whatever they would like. And if you don't include one of these, it'll just use the default one that we've already provided on the client side. Next, go ahead and inside your models folder, you're also going to create a blog.ts file. And much like you did for the user, you're going to create your model schema here. So this is going to be a const blog schema. It's going to be of type schema, and it's going to be a new schema, and inside of that object, you're going to pass in all of your keys, and you're going to define each of them. First, you're going to have a title, and it's going to be of type string, and it's going to be having the unique value set to true. That's because we don't want two blog posts to share the same name, just in case we ever do some name resolution in the address bar in the future. The next thing we're going to put in is an author. And how we're going to do this for the type is we're going to be actually calling a mongoose.schema.types.objectID because this is actually a Mongo ID. And we're going to have the ref key equal to the user with a capital U because that's what the user schema is called. And this is how it links it together. I'm going to copy and paste the type string here for content. And I'm going to do the same thing for my headline and my picture keys. Now, before we export this, we're actually going to have a comma after our schema object here, and we're going to add another object that actually is the options for Mongoose, and we're going to put timestamps equal to true. And that's because we're going to want to organize these when we call them from the server side by the date they were posted or the date they were updated. So when you have timestamps equal to true, it's going to allow us to determine when this post was created and when it was last updated. Once you've done that, at the bottom of the file, you're going to export default mongoose.model. You're going to pass in the iBlog interface into the chevrons. You're going to give this a name of blog and pass in the blog schema. And this is all we need to do for our blog model. So naturally, once we've created the interface and the model, we're going to go ahead and create the controller. I'm going to copy and paste the user.ts file and rename it to blog.ts. And inside of this file, I'm going to use my case-sensitive find and replace here. I'm going to replace all instances of lowercase user to lowercase blog, uppercase user to uppercase blog, new user and saved user to new blog and save blog, and then I'll go through each function and correct them accordingly. Next, I'm going to get rid of this validate function because we don't need it, and I'm going to start modifying this create function. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that fire token because I don't need it. Inside of the request body definition here, I'm going to change UID and name to the author, the title, the content, the headline, and finally the picture. I'm going to pass all of these in to my const blog object, and this is how we're going to save a new blog object. I'm going to go ahead and just modify the logging statements here, and inside of the return, I'm going to get rid of that fire token. And just like that, that function is done. We can go ahead and get rid of the login function. The read and read all functions are going to be exactly the way they are right now, as they're pretty compatible with the way they were before just by replacing the word blog. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this read all function and use it as my base for my query function. The query function is going to take in the request.body and it's going to use it to search through the blogs for a specific type of blog that I'm looking for. So inside of the blog.find, you just simply pass in the request.body, and then this function stays the same. I'm going to copy and paste this once more for my update function. And how we're going to update it is by our blog ID. So I'm going to copy and paste that request params blog ID from my function above, change my logging statement, and inside of my find, I'm going to change this to a find by ID, pass in my Mongo ID here, and inside of the then block, I'm going to change the returning prop to just a single blog, and I'm going to check to see if a blog is returned. So I'm going to put an if-else statement checking to see if the blog exists. And I'm going to copy and paste this 404 not found message from above if it doesn't. But if it does, I'm going to do a blog.set and then set it to my request.body. And I'll show you how this works on this client side in an upcoming video. And then I'm going to return my blog.save function similar to the way we did in the create route. So if you want, you can go up and just copy and paste this. And what we'll be doing is just changing the word new blog to save blog. Go ahead and update your logging to reflect that you've just updated the blog. And I'm going to go ahead and just save this file, and you can see prettier, just format it for me a little bit more. Next, I'm going to copy this read function one more time, and I'm going to use this for my delete function. I'm going to call it a delete blog. And I'm going to do a logging warn here because anytime we're deleting something, it's a little bit dangerous. So maybe the logging in your console will be a little bit more noticeable. I'm going to change the function to a find by ID and delete. And inside of the then block, I'm just going to go ahead and return a status of 200 with a message saying the blog was deleted. You can use a status of 201 if you want, meaning that something was changed. And then in the export default, I'm going to go ahead and add all of the functions I just created. I'm going to go to my server.ts file and import my blog routes from my routes blog like I did for my user. But before this actually is going to work, I actually have to define these. And how I'm going to do that is creating a new file in the routes called blog.ts. Copy and paste everything from my user file and just modify it slightly. Change the controller to the blog, get rid of the functions that don't exist anymore, change the instance of user ID to blog ID, and then add a couple more routes. So I'll copy and paste the create route, change this to query, and change the route to query as well. Add another post route, change it to update, and change the query to a blog ID after putting in the word, let's say, update. Copy and paste that one more time, add a delete route, and this can just be the blog ID by itself. And now everything for the blog routes looks pretty good. We can just go ahead and get rid of that extract Firebase info because we don't need that. Now inside of the routes, go ahead and add them to your server.ts file, just as you see me doing here. And just like that, we've added them to the server. So let's go ahead and start our server. I'm using TS node dev. And what you can do is you can go ahead and open up Postmon or any other tool that you use. And we're going to go ahead and check to see if this works. So you can see here, if I type in blogs and hit send, you can see that the count is 0 and no blogs are returned, meaning that this index is working properly. So now for the client side, I'm actually going to use that same call I just did, and that's how I'm going to populate the index. And once we do have blogs, you'll see them all pop up, but it's going to be populated this way, and I'm going to make sure to sort it by the date they were created or the date they were last updated. So now on the client side, go to your interfaces folder and create a blog.ts file. Here, you're going to be exporting a default interface of iBlog. You're going to have everything that you had on the server side, plus a few extra parameters. So the very first thing you're going to put in here is you're going to be putting in an underscore ID, which is the Mongo ID that is automatically accounted for when you extend the document on the server side. Then you're going to add all the parameters we had on the other side, with the exception of author not being the same, as you're going to have it being a string or a user, depending on which route we're calling and if it's returning that full user or just a string. Everything else, such as content, headline, and picture, are going to remain the same. Picture is still going to be optional. And then you're going to have two additional fields called created at as a string and updated at as a string. So now the blog interface looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and go to the home page, which is going to be our blog index, and start writing some code. We're going to create a couple state variables. I'm going to have a const blogs and its setter function. This is going to be using the iBlog interface, and it's going to be an array. And you could just initialize it with an empty array. Make sure you import useState from React. Next, I'm going to have a loading variable and its setter function. This is going to be a bool, and it's going to be set to true. Then I'm going to have an error and a set error, and this is going to be an empty string to start. And now it's time to create a function. So I'm going to create a const get all blogs, and this is going to be async because it's going to be calling the backend. And I'm also going to add a use effect from React, and it's going to have an empty dependency array because I only want to run it on startup. And this is going to call the get all blogs. So essentially, whenever you load the page, the get all blogs is called. Next, I'm going to add a try catch and start working on my call to the backend. I'm going to do a const response is equal to an await. I'm going to use Axios again, just like I did for the user. I'm going to have a method get. My URL is going to be similar to the user's call, and this is going to be from our config.server.url, and I'm just going to have a /blogs. And then I'm going to check to see if my response is of a status of 200 or 304. If my response is good, then I'm going to let this blogs object be equal to my response.data.blogs as the iBlog interface and as an array. And I'm doing this so I can actually access the sort function for an array. And how we're going to do that is we're going to add the sort lambda, and inside of it, we're going to have a function with the props x, y. And basically what this means is that it's going to be doing an operation with this x and y being two different variables inside of the array. And if these were numbers, you would do something like, x minus y or y minus x. In this case, we're going to do a comparison of strings, and it's going to be by comparing the updated at with the y, doing a local compare of the updated at on x. So doing it this way is going to always make sure that the newest updated blog is going first. And when we test it, I'll know if I got it backwards or not. And then finally, you're going to set the blogs equal to that blogs object after it's sorted. If there's an error, go ahead and set an error saying something like unable to retrieve blogs, or you could do the error.message itself. You can also log this to the console if you like. And then on this try catch block, you can do a finally and set the loading to false, because either way, with a positive result or an error, we're still going to set the loading to false. And let's set it with a timeout like we've been doing inside of the other files, so you see an exaggerated loading time. Now, if we're loading, we're going to do a similar loading component like we've been doing. And you could just simply pass in loading blogs ... or you can have some sort of fancy text here or a spinner. You can put whatever you want here. Inside of the container of the main return block, we're going to go ahead and do some editing. So before we actually display any blogs, let's check to see if the length of the blogs is equal to 0 or not. So if we don't have any blogs, I'm going to have it display a message saying something like, there are no blogs yet, maybe you should post one. And then I can add a link to the edit page with the word post. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're only going to show this by checking if the blog's length is equal to 0. and that's what those two ampersands mean. And make sure that post word has a link from React Router DOM, and it's going to the edit page. And then here I'm just going to copy and paste an emoji just so it looks cool. Now we can go ahead and map the blogs. So we can do a blogs map. And then inside of the map, we're going to have a function with a blog and an index. Inside of it, we can return, and we're going to add a div. Make sure that the top element, in this case a div, always has a key inside of a map. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of console log errors. And if we take a look at the blog here, we want it to look at something like this. This is the original blog theme that I'm basing this off of. So what we're going to do for these little blog previews that you see here, these little sections, we're going to go ahead and create another component to visualize this. And we're going to go to the components folder, and we're going to create a blog preview component. Much like we've been doing, make sure to import React at the top, and then create some props and create a function component that injects those props. You can copy and paste one of the other components if you like. Here, you're just going to see me type it out as we normally do. For the blog preview props, we're going to have a couple things. We're going to have an ID. We're going to have a title. We're going to have a headline. We're going to have an author. And we're going to have a created at. And an updated at. And these are going to be of all type string. Again, as I said, make sure to create the function component as we've been doing in the other files. And inside of this function component, we can go ahead and declare the props like we've been doing as well. So declare a const variable equal to props and inject all of the props inside of them. This is just to keep all the code looking clean. We're going to create a return, and inside of that return, let's create a card. The card is going to have a class name, and that class name is going to have a border -0 because we don't want a border on it. Next, we're going to have a card body. It's also going to have a class name. Inside of the class name, you're going to have a p-0 for no padding. Then inside of the card body, we're going to have a link. That link is going to go to the blogs/ID page. So it'll bring you to a specific blog. And we're going to style this. And we're going to say that we're going to have a text decoration of none so that it doesn't underline it or anything like that, or mess up any of the text that we have in here. Also add a class name and change this to text primary so that it's the proper color and it's not green. Inside of it, we're going to put an h1 strong, which is going to give us a nice big bold title. You're going to inject the title. Then you can have an h3, and inside of that you could put the headline. Make sure to add a br at the end. We're going to be using this br just to space after the link. And now we're going to check to see if the created at is not equal to the updated at. That means that this post was recently updated. So then we're going to put in some text that says this was updated by the author at, and then inject the date and call the toLocale string. And if it wasn't, then we're going to say posted by the author at the date of created at. So this will not only separate if it's created or updated, it will also give you the string in a human readable format and not the milliseconds. And then finally, after all of this, you can pass in the children, just in case we do pass in anything else into this blog preview. This is just optional. We're probably not actually going to use it, but I do always like to put this in just in case. Finally, you can export the blog preview at the bottom, and then we can go back to our index page. Inside of the div, we can go ahead and import that blog preview, and we can pass in the ID as being the blog._ID. We can pass in the author as the, and then in brackets, you can do a blog.author as the iUser because we're going to be getting that full object, so all the user information. And then on the outside, accessing the name property of that. It's a cool little trick you can do with Typescript. The headline should just be the blog.headline. The title should be the blog title. The created at and updated at should be the blog created at and updated at respectively. And then you could throw in an HR element and close it off for a little line to keep everything separated. Now you've probably heard me say we're going to populate that user object. So instead of returning that user object as a string, we want it to return the full user object because we want to access all their information. So go back to the controller and go to the read controller inside of your blog. And after the find by ID, we're going to add a block that's going to be .populate. And inside of that populate, inside of some single quotes, you're going to put the user property, it's going to be the author property. And what this is going to do is going to tell Mongoose that, hey, that author property is actually another document collection in Mongoose, which happens to be the user model. And if you find a corresponding author, go ahead and fill out that author's information. You can go ahead and add that to the read all. And I'm also going to put it inside of the query. And that should be about everything we need there. So now let's go ahead and start the server and the client side again. And I'm just going to show you that the blogs are equal to 0 here, and you should be able to see that message that we posted. So you can see here that it says there are no blogs yet. You should post one. And if I click on that post, it takes us to the edit page. But nothing happens because we haven't made that page yet. Quickly before we end, make sure to add that error component at the bottom. We didn't add that yet, and that's just in case there's an error. We want to make sure that we see it through the error text component that we made before. So in the next video, we're going to begin working on that edit page. And we're going to be using some really cool tools, some really cool concepts. And once we start making those, you're going to see this thing just really come together. It's going to be awesome. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning back in, and I'll see you in the next video.